The wind was sharp enough to slice skin, the kind that curled under your collar and gnawed at the bones. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the sky hung heavy and low, swollen with clouds the color of steel. Caleb Mercer trudged along the railroad path, his boots crunching over frost-bitten weeds and shattered glass that had long since lost its shine. He carried no more than a burlap sack slung over one shoulder and a rifle strapped across his back, though the weapon had seen more death in war than it ever did in peace. He was a man of wiry build and drawn features, with eyes that had seen too much and spoken too little. The war had taken his brother and left him a stitched-up husk, the sort of man who learned to survive by staying silent and moving forward. He'd built a cabin in a hollow north of the line, a place far from people and farther from memory. That winter, he was coming back from trading jerky and tan pelts for flour and salt at a backwater depot down south. The sun was melting behind a ridge of pine when he saw her. She sat near the rail, not on it, not close enough to die, but near. Her back was to him, shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare shawl, a suitcase beside her sagging open like it had given up trying to hold anything together. At first glance she looked like part of the earth, stout, slumped, and still. He would have walked on. Probably should have. But something about the sound stopped him. It was crying. Not loud. Not ragged or dramatic. Just quiet sobs, steady as a heartbeat. Almost private, as if she thought no one had the right to hear it. Caleb paused, keeping his distance. The wind dragged her muffled whimpers through the brush, and he felt the hair along his arms lift, not from fear, but familiarity. That sound, the hollow ache in it, belonged to someone who'd been left behind. He cleared his throat softly, the only warning he'd offer. She jerked her head around, startled. Her eyes were swollen, red, and rimmed with frost, but they locked on his with a stubborn clarity that made him take another step. "I don't mean harm," he said, voice low and dry. She blinked at him, lips parted, breath clouding in the frigid air. He could see then, her skin blotchy from cold, her clothes worn thin across her heavy frame. She was a big woman, yes, but there was nothing soft in the way she sat. No indulgence. Just the kind of size that life gave you when it didn't offer comfort, only need. "I don't have nothing worth stealing," she said, wiping at her nose with the back of her hand. Her voice was hoarse, defiant. "Wasn't looking to," Caleb answered. He glanced down at the tracks. Cold place to be sitting. She didn't respond. He studied her for a beat longer. She had a bandaged hand and a split in her bottom lip, swollen purple. Faint bruises traced her neck like fingerprints trying to fade. He recognized the signs. Not the kind of wounds a fall gave you. The kind a man gave when he thought a woman couldn't run fast or hit hard. "Name's Caleb," he said, shifting his sack. "You got someplace to go?" She shook her head, slow and quiet, the tears thickening again behind her silence. Caleb looked down the empty stretch of rail. Nothing but trees and time. "Then you best come with me," he said. "Ain't right to leave anyone out in this cold." She eyed him. Not with trust. Not yet. But with a flicker of decision that cut through her misery. She stood, gathering her open suitcase. What few belongings she had clattered loosely inside, a cracked mirror, a pair of boots tied together, some yellowed paper and a scarf. "Name's Martha," she said. They walked together in silence for a time, the sky deepening to ash behind them. The road to Caleb's place wasn't marked. It forked off the track, curved down through black pines and shallow frozen streams. Martha struggled with the slope, breath heaving, coat pulling tight around her middle, but she didn't complain. He noticed that. Not many people that size moved with such quiet resolve. Her breath was short, but her steps were steady. Caleb kept his pace slow. After about a mile, they reached a rise where the trees opened just enough to reveal the hollow below. A small cabin squatted at the base, its chimney trailing a thin line of smoke. A pen held 2 goats, a pile of chopped wood leaned against the porch, and a single lantern burned faint through a window. "I built it after the war," Caleb offered, not sure why he said anything at all. "Didn't want much company." "Still don't really?" "Then why bring me?" Martha asked, voice thick with fatigue. Caleb adjusted his grip on the strap over his shoulder. "Don't know. Just figured I'd hate myself if I didn't." They reached the door and he pushed it open. Inside was small and tight, wood stove in the center, bed tucked into one corner, shelves lined with jars of dried beans, roots, and salt. A table, 2 chairs, and a trunk. Sparse but warm. Caleb gestured her in. She hesitated just long enough to remind him how far trust had to travel. Once inside, she collapsed into the nearest chair, hands trembling as she pulled her coat off. Her dress beneath was faded, but she wore it like armor. Caleb stoked the stove and added more wood, filling the room with sharp pine smoke and a rising orange glow. He ladled out a bowl of rabbit stew from the pot simmering on the stovetop. She took it without speaking, her fingers wrapping tight around the ceramic like she expected it to vanish. When she finally ate, it was slow, mechanical. Halfway through, she looked up. "You ever get tired of being alone?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight dancing shadows across his weathered face. "Used to," he said. "Then I just got used to it." Martha set her bowl down and rubbed her hands together. Her knuckles were chapped raw. "I was married." He wasn't much of a man, but he knew how to make a promise sound sweet. Caleb waited. Let her speak. "He said we'd get land out west. That I could start a garden, maybe even open a boarding house. Made it sound like I was gonna matter to someone." Her voice cracked then, not with emotion, but shame. "He leave you?" Caleb asked quietly. "Left me with a bruised jaw and a train ticket to nowhere. Told me to wait while he fetched help. That was 4 days ago." Neither of them said anything for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled against the boards like an old dog begging to be let in. "You can stay," Caleb said finally. "For the winter anyway." Martha didn't look at him, just nodded once and wrapped the shawl around her shoulders tighter. "I don't want your pity," she said. "Don't got any to give." That night, Martha took the cot and Caleb laid down on a bedroll near the stove. He didn't sleep much and neither did she. Somewhere in the middle of the night, she began to hum. It wasn't a song he recognized, just a low, steady melody like rain tapping on a roof. He listened, eyes open to the ceiling, until the sound faded. In the morning, the sky broke open and snow began to fall in thick, wet clumps. Caleb brewed coffee over the fire, and Martha watched the snow through the window. Her face had changed, not in softness but in solidity. The crying woman by the tracks was gone, tucked beneath her like something folded and stitched away. He poured her a tin cup without asking. She accepted it without thanks. That was fine. They weren't there for pleasantries. Outside, the railroad track stretched away, covered now in a fresh blanket of white. The world was quiet. Cling. But nothing ever stayed quiet long. The snow piled thick that winter, burying everything in silence. The wind whistled through the trees at night like voices from the war Caleb couldn't forget, and the fire was a constant effort, feeding it, banking it, coaxing heat from wet logs and scraps of pine. Each morning, the hollow was a hush of white and gray, with the trees bowed in reverence under their burden. Martha took to the rhythm slowly. She wasn't fast and the cold didn't favor her, but she moved with purpose. She was strong in a way that wasn't showy. Her size made things harder, bending to gather wood, reaching the high shelves Caleb had nailed to the wall years before without a second thought, but she found ways. She used a stool, a stick, her own ingenuity. She never asked for help. Caleb noticed that. She also never wasted anything. Leftover broth became stew. Torn clothes became patchwork. She mended holes in his socks without him asking, and when she found the ripped lining in his coat, she didn't mention it. Just fixed it one morning while he was out checking the traps. He didn't say thank you. Not because he didn't want to. Because he didn't know how. She didn't press. They spoke little. When they did, it was functional. "Where's the salt?" "Past the kettle. There's a fox near the coop." But the quiet between them wasn't hollow anymore. It was filling with something dense. Not affection, not yet, but something durable. A shared space that neither needed to own to belong in. One morning, after a long night of freezing rain, Martha slipped on the steps. The world was glass then, every surface slick and unforgiving. She fell hard on her side, crying out once. Caleb, inside splitting kindling, heard it and dropped the hatchet. He found her on her hands and knees, red-faced and furious. She waved him off when he tried to help her up. "I'm fine," she snapped. "You're not." "I said I'm fine." Her voice was thick with something more than pain, humiliation maybe. That he understood. Pride didn't care what shape you were in. It didn't ask how long you'd been broken. It just stood up, again and again, even when your knees screamed. Still he offered a hand. Just held it out. Said nothing. She stared at it for a second too long, then took it. Inside, she sat by the fire, rubbing her hip through her skirts. He brought her tea, handed it to her without a word. She took it with a nod. "Don't like being looked after," she muttered. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Didn't do it to make you like it." That earned a small sound from her, a half laugh, half huff. Something between surrender and recognition. "I'm not weak," she added. "I didn't say you were." She looked at him, then really looked. Not the glance of someone weighing safety or testing motives, but of someone seeing a person fully and deciding not to flinch. You ever lose someone? She asked, almost as if accusing him. Caleb stared into the fire. Brother. Shot through the neck at Antietam. Bled out on me while I held him. Martha absorbed that with a small nod, like it explained something she'd already suspected. I had a sister, she said. Named Ruth. She died before the war. Fever took her inside of 3 days. You too close. Closer than I ever was with my husband. He didn't ask more. Didn't need to. That afternoon, Caleb brought out the old saw and the sled. Together, they dragged logs from the edge of the woodpile to the chopping block. She braced them while he swung the axe. Her hands were too sore for splitting, but she steadied, stacked, moved at her own pace. They didn't speak. The sound of the axe rang across the hollow like a clock keeping time. That night, as they sat across the table from one another eating boiled potatoes and salted venison, Caleb found himself watching her hands. The way they moved, thick-fingered and sure. She didn't fidget. Didn't complain about the cold. Just kept moving forward, even when her breath came short and her knees cracked. You ever work a farm? He asked, unexpected even to him. She wiped her mouth with the edge of her sleeve. Sort of. My daddy kept pigs and onions. Never had land of our own though. Just rented and hoped each season wouldn't kill us. Caleb nodded. You know how to keep goats? She blinked. Some. They don't like strangers much. But if they get used to you, they're easy enough. You offering me a job? He shrugged. They need milking. I'm not always around. Pause. I could do that, she said, quieter this time. Then you should. After that, she rose earlier. Caleb would wake to the smell of boiling water and goat milk steaming in the pan. She learned their names, Greta and Latch, and even though Greta headbutted her the first time she tried to touch her, Martha didn't give up. Within 2 days the goats led her near. Within 4 she had a rhythm. He watched all this from a distance. From behind the shed wall. From the edge of the woods. Just watching. Sometimes she'd hum while working, that same low tune from the first night. Like wind winding through rocks. She never sang it fully. Just carried it like breath. In the evenings they read from an old Bible he had tucked away. Not from piety, neither of them clung to God much, but for the words. The rhythm. The stories. She had a voice that made the verses sound like poetry again. Caleb didn't say anything, but some nights he'd hand her the book without asking, and she'd open it, finger brushing under the lines as she read aloud. By mid-January the snow had crusted over, hard enough to walk on if you stepped right. Caleb tracked a pair of foxes near the creek, and Martha spent her mornings sewing buttons from scraps she found in the trunk. She had a way of making things last. But there were still nights when she woke screaming. He heard it twice. The first time he didn't move. Just let it happen. The second time he got up and put a log on the fire. Didn't say a word. She sat upright on the cot, breathing like she'd run miles, eyes wild. But when she saw him, something in her settled. Not calmed, just anchored. I dreamed I was still in that house, she whispered. Couldn't find the door. Kept running through the same room. He nodded, sat down on the floor near the fire. Dream about war? She asked after a long beat. Sometimes. Mostly just the waiting before. She laid back down. Didn't sleep again that night, but the room didn't feel as hollow. February came harder. Ice storms cracked branches like bones. One night, a tree split and landed near the coop. The crash jolted them both awake, rifles in hand before they could think. They rushed outside, barefoot, breath smoking. Caleb cursed as he saw the damage, one goat spooked and missing. They found her the next day, stiff and cold by the creek. Martha didn't cry. She just dug a grave with Caleb, her hands blistered by the end. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked as they stood over the small mound. Sometimes, he said. But where would I go? I don't know. Somewhere that doesn't hurt to remember. He looked at her. Snow clung to her lashes. She looked tired, yes, but more than that, she looked determined. This place hurts less than most, he admitted. Because you built it yourself? No. Because no one here asks anything from me I can't give. She considered that. Well, she said. You've given me a bed. A meal. A quiet I didn't know I needed. He brushed snow from his sleeves. You've paid that back. I wasn't trying to, she said. Just didn't want to feel useless. He nodded slowly. You're not. That was the closest they came to anything like tenderness. That night the wind didn't scream as loud. The fire burned cleaner. Martha read a psalm by lantern light, voice clear and soft, and Caleb closed his eyes and let the words settle. The snow would keep falling. The trees would keep groaning under their weight. But for the first time in years he didn't mind the waiting. The thaw came slowly, as if reluctant to release the land from its grip. Ice clung to the north side of trees well into March, and the creeks murmured like they were remembering how to move. Caleb watched the sun linger longer in the sky each evening, stretching the shadows until they grew soft and weary. The cabin walls, soaked in months of smoke and silence, seemed to breathe again with the melt. Martha had grown quieter, not withdrawn but reflective. Her body had adjusted to the demands of the wilderness, though her joints still ached in the mornings. She no longer winced when lifting the pail or sighing onto the stool. She had taken to baking cornbread in a cast-iron skillet, using precious cornmeal like it was an offering. Caleb noticed she saved the last piece for him every time, though she never said as much. One morning she brought out the scarf from her suitcase, the one he'd seen spilling out by the tracks all those weeks ago. It was torn, stained near one end, but she held it in her lap like something holy. He watched her mend it in silence, fingers pulling thread through cloth with the precision of memory. When she caught him looking, she didn't hide it. She simply said, "Ruth gave it to me the winter before she died. I kept it even when my husband said it was worthless." He didn't reply. There wasn't a word worth saying when something like that surfaced. So he nodded once and left her with it. They settled into a rhythm so consistent it began to feel dangerous, as if the world might notice they'd carved out something near to peace and come to collect the debt. That collection came one evening in late March, when the snow had retreated enough to expose the trail leading into the hollow. Caleb was repairing a loose hinge on the coupe while Martha gathered herbs from the base of the pines. The sound came low and unexpected, hooves on soft earth, distant voices. Caleb stood upright, eyes narrowing toward the trees. Martha sensed it too. She froze mid-reach, herbs cradled in her palms, her shoulders stiff. Caleb motioned with 2 fingers and she dropped the bundle and moved quickly toward the cabin. No questions, just instinct. Inside, she went to the stove, pulling the fire lower. He handed her the rifle. "How many?" she asked. 3. "Maybe 4, he replied, already strapping his revolver to his hip. They came slow and loud, men on horseback, faces smeared with the long dust of travel, guns at their sides. Caleb recognized the type before he saw their faces. Rootless men looking for warmth, for food, for someone weaker than them. The kind of men who took what the war hadn't already. The leader was a thick-shouldered man with a pale scar down his cheek and dead, pale eyes that didn't blink enough. Behind him rode 2 others, younger, grinning like they already smelled the stew in the cabin. The 4th rode in silence, trailing the others, wrapped in a coat too large for him, face hidden beneath a broad-brimmed hat. "Nice place you got," Scar said, dismounting with the lazy entitlement of someone long unpunished. "Didn't expect company this far from the road." Caleb stepped forward. "It's quiet country." Scar grinned. "That's what I like. Quiet. You got coffee?" "Don't have much," Caleb said flatly. "And what I do have isn't free." One of the younger men snorted. "We're not begging. "No," Caleb said. "You're not." Scar's smile didn't move, but his hand drifted near his belt. "We ain't looking for trouble." "Then you best keep riding." A long silence stretched. Behind the scarred man, the 4th rider dismounted slowly. He walked stiffly, favoring one leg. As he drew closer, his hat tilted slightly, and Caleb caught a glimpse of dark eyes beneath a scarred brow. Native, maybe mixed blood, face weathered but alert. He didn't speak, just stood apart, watching. Martha had the rifle resting across her lap inside, just out of view of the window. Her breath was shallow but her grip steady. She had seen men like these before. They carried the smell of hunger and violence, the kind that never needed much excuse. Caleb didn't flinch. "You want to rest? There's a clearing 2 miles west. Water, space to camp. You go now, you'll make it before dark." Scar weighed him with those ghost eyes. "You military?" "Used to be. I can tell. You hold yourself like you still got a commander somewhere." "I don't. But I've got bullets." "That did it." The other 2 shifted uncomfortably. The 4th man still hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. But his eyes were on Caleb now. Steady. Measuring. Scar spat into the snow. "You're lucky we're in a good mood." "No," Caleb replied. "You're lucky I am." After a tense moment, Scar nodded toward his men. "Let's ride. Ain't worth the trouble." They turned, slowly remounted and headed back the way they came. All except the 4th man. He lingered, met Caleb's eyes, then gave the smallest of nods, barely more than a twitch of the chin, before turning his horse and following. When they were gone, Caleb exhaled. Martha opened the door without a word, rifle still in hand. "Something about that 4th one," he murmured. "Didn't ride with them in spirit." He didn't look at me like I was prey, she said. That's more than I can say for the others. For the rest of the evening neither spoke much. But both stayed up later than usual. Caleb cleaned the rifle. Martha patched the curtains tighter. The silence between them felt more urgent now, laced with understanding. 3 days later he appeared again. Alone. Caleb spotted him at the edge of the woods just before dusk. He wasn't riding this time. He walked with a limp, one hand resting on the handle of a blade tied at his waist. Caleb didn't raise his weapon, yet. I come alone, the man said, voice low and rough with disuse. Name's Ash. Caleb motioned to the clearing. You lost. Ash shook his head. Saw you stand your ground. Figured you'd be the type who might not shoot a man for knocking. Caleb didn't answer right away. Martha appeared in the doorway holding a pan. She stared hard at Ash, her jaw set. You hungry? Caleb finally asked. Ash blinked once, surprised. Yes. Inside, Ash sat at the table like a man unused to furniture. He ate slowly, like the food wasn't real, like it might vanish if he rushed. He explained little, only that he'd been with that crew for protection after an injury, that he left them when it became clear they had more interest in looting than surviving. I don't steal, he said simply. And I don't hurt women. That was all Martha needed to hear. She handed him another slice of bread. Caleb remained cautious, but he watched the way Ash sat, always near the door, always with eyes scanning the room. Like someone who knew danger too well to ever let it settle behind him. That night, Ash slept in the shed, curled near the tools with his coat wrapped around him. He hadn't asked for shelter. Caleb hadn't offered. But it felt like the beginning of something, a quiet test. Over the next days Ash worked. He mended fences, dug up stumps with careful patience, taught Martha how to snare rabbits without wasting rope. His legs slowed him, but his skill didn't. When asked where he'd learned it, he only replied, My grandfather was Apache. Taught me before I could hold a knife straight. He never pressed for thanks. Never lingered long in one place. But over time, the silence between him, Caleb, and Martha became less wary, more understood. Each of them carried too much past to speak it aloud. But it echoed, shared in the way they moved around each other. One evening, as the sun dripped gold through the bare trees, Ash said, They'll come back. Caleb didn't ask who. Ash just nodded. Scar. He doesn't like being told no. They're probably circling now, looking for a reason to make trouble. Martha didn't flinch. Then we'll be ready. For a long time no one spoke. Caleb watched the fire, Ash whittled a piece of wood, and Martha hummed that low song under her breath. They were different people than they'd been at the start of winter. Not healed, no, not yet. But hardened into something solid. Something resilient. Outside, the snow had melted into rivulets, and the world waited in silence, poised for what would come next. The first sign was smoke. It curled up behind the trees beyond the southern ridge, too thick and black to be a cooking fire. Caleb spotted it at mid-morning, squinting against the sun as he carried a bundle of kindling back toward the cabin. Ash stood just outside the shed, sharpening a blade. When Caleb slowed, gaze locked on the sky, Ash straightened without a word and followed his line of sight. That's not ours, Caleb said. Ash nodded. Could be signaling. Could be a warning. Martha came out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. What is it? Caleb turned to her. Get what you need. Hide the Bible. Pack food. Now. She didn't ask questions. She went inside. The fire meant one thing. Scar and his men were close again. Closer than they'd ever dared before. Whether they meant to send a message or just got sloppy didn't matter. It was a sign that the fragile boundary between this little hollow and the world outside was dissolving. They had no fences, no locks. Just instinct, firepower, and resolve. Ash moved quickly. He gathered tools, coiled rope, checked their snares. Every motion was economical, practiced. When Martha emerged with a bag slung over her shoulder and the rifle strapped across her chest, her face was pale but steady. They'll come at night, Ash said. Or dawn. That's how cowards do it, when people are tired, half awake. Caleb nodded grimly. Then we won't sleep. They fortified what they could. The shed became a blind, fitted with a crossbeam and loaded with spare ammunition. The cabin windows were shuttered tight. Caleb dug shallow foxholes just beyond the coop, covering them with pine branches and snow. Martha gathered water, filled pots and buckets, laid out bandages by the stove. Her hands didn't tremble once. By dusk, the wind had picked up again. The smoke was gone, but the smell lingered, burnt pine and grease and something faintly metallic. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle across his knees, and thought of his brother again. Of the sound his voice made the moment before it disappeared. Ash didn't say much, but he didn't need to. He sat cross-legged near the coop, knife still in hand. His eyes scanned the tree line over and over, never resting. Martha remained inside, tending to the fire, boiling water as if they might still need tea before blood. When the first footstep cracked a twig behind the north trees, it wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Caleb raised his rifle. Ash didn't move, didn't blink. Another sound followed, a boot on frozen soil, then silence. They waited. A shape emerged, half-shadowed, tall and broad-shouldered. Scar. He stood just inside the clearing, flanked by two others. One of the young men from before, and another Caleb didn't recognize, tall, wiry, with a pistol dangling casually from one hand. "I warned you," Caleb called out. Scar stepped forward. "You did. But I didn't take you for the type to hide behind a woman and a cripple." The words cut through the quiet like a whip. Ash stood. "You looking for something?" Caleb asked coldly. Scar grinned, and it made his eyes look even emptier. "Supplies. Food. Maybe a little warmth. We got none of that out there, and I figured since you were so generous with your threats, you might be generous with your hearth." "I told you to ride west," Caleb said. "This is the last time I tell you anything." Scar raised his pistol. From the window, the crack of Martha's rifle shattered the air. One of the men dropped. The woods exploded into motion. Ash lunged forward without hesitation, moving low and fast. He tackled the second man before he could aim, driving the knife into his thigh and twisting hard. The man shrieked, buckling. Caleb fired twice, missed the first but caught Scar in the shoulder. The man staggered back, fury overtaking surprise. Behind them, more movement, two more men breaking from the treeline. "Reinforcements." Martha shouted, "Two more." Ash rolled into the underbrush, disappearing like smoke. Caleb dropped behind a stump, reloading with shaking fingers. His heart hammered not with fear but memory, battlefields and cries, the sick weight of decision. But this wasn't war. It was his home. His family, whatever strange shape that word had now taken. Scar bellowed as he charged forward, one arm hanging limp from the gunshot, his eyes locked on Caleb. The rifle kicked against Caleb's shoulder and Scar fell hard, groaning as he clawed at the earth. The newcomers hesitated at the edge of the clearing. One turned to run. Ash came out of the trees like a ghost, caught the man at the knees, and brought him down with brutal precision. The last man raised his rifle toward the cabin. Caleb fired. The silence that followed was heavy. Nothing moved except the snow falling from branches knocked loose in the chaos. Caleb stood slowly, gun still raised. Ash emerged, panting, blood on his sleeve, not his. Martha appeared in the doorway, her rifle still aimed, cheeks red and eyes sharp. "They gone?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "All of them." Ash crouched near one of the bodies. Scar still breathing. Caleb walked over, eyes hard. Scar groaned, blood pooling beneath him. "You made a mistake," he whispered through clenched teeth. "So did you," Caleb said. Scar tried to reach for his pistol, but Caleb kicked it aside. Martha came to stand beside him, quiet and resolved. She looked down at Scar with something colder than anger. Not revenge, just exhaustion. Like a storm seeing the damage it didn't want to cause. "We let him go?" Ash asked. "No," Martha said before Caleb could speak. "He comes back if we do. He finds someone else. He doesn't stop." Ash met Caleb's eyes. Caleb nodded. It was done in silence. No speeches. No glory. They buried the bodies far from the creek, behind the ridge. Ash said a few words in a language Caleb didn't recognize. Martha held the Bible but didn't open it. When it was over, they returned to the cabin. Inside, the fire still burned, the stew still warm. Martha sat first, back straight, rifle across her lap like a question that had been answered. Ash leaned against the wall, exhaustion settling into his bones. Caleb poured 3 cups of tea. He handed them out without a word. Then he sat. The wind outside had calmed, but something inside him had shifted. Not relief. Not pride. Just a deep, humming certainty. They had made a stand. Together. And what remained was no longer fear, but purpose. Tomorrow the world would keep spinning. But for tonight they would sit, drink and keep watch. The day after the attack dawned gray and wet, as if the earth itself were trying to wash away what had happened. Rain trickled through the trees, soaking the disturbed soil where they'd buried the dead. The silence around the cabin felt different now, not peaceful but heavy, like the woods were waiting to see what kind of people Caleb, Martha, and Ash would become after blood had been spilled. Caleb rose early before the sun crested the ridge. He checked the traps, mended the fence where bullets had splintered it, and collected the discarded shells that lay scattered across the clearing. His hands were methodical, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept seeing Scar's eyes, wide, frantic, unwilling to accept the end he'd run toward. It wasn't guilt Caleb felt. It was clarity. Some men couldn't be reasoned with. Some threats didn't back down. Inside the cabin, Martha stirred the fire back to life. She moved slowly, as if her body were remembering itself after a long, violent dream. The rifle sat beside the door, always within reach. When Caleb stepped inside, wet from the rain, she met his eyes with a wordless nod. They didn't need to speak about what had happened. It was written in the mud on their boots, the soot on their skin, and the way they now stood a little closer to each other than they used to. Ash was already awake, sitting beneath the awning with a knife in his hands and a length of pine branch he was carving into something unspoken. He barely looked up when Caleb passed him, but there was a shared recognition in the stillness between them. Later, over breakfast, Martha finally broke the quiet. "They'll send others." Caleb looked up from his bowl. "You think?" Ash nodded, chewing slowly. "Scar was part of a larger group once. I heard them talk about it. A camp south of the river. They move around. Take what they want. When someone doesn't return, someone else comes looking." "So this doesn't end with them," Martha said. "No," Ash replied. "But they won't come quick. Not after what happened here." Caleb leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed. "We can't stay defenseless. We need supplies. Ammunition. Medicine. The snow's melted, roads will be passable soon. I could make the trip." Martha set down her spoon. "To town?" He nodded. "Over the ridge. 2 days there, 1 to gather what we need, 2 back." She hesitated. "It's dangerous. So is sitting here waiting." Ash met Caleb's eyes. "You can't go alone." Caleb frowned. "You're still limping." Ash shrugged. "I'm not dead. And I know that trail. Better than anyone." Martha stood and walked to the window. She didn't say anything for a long while. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the eaves. Then, with a quiet breath, she turned. "Take what you need. But hurry back." They left at dawn the next day. Martha packed food, wrapped hard bread and salted meat in cloth. She gave Ash one of the scarves she'd mended and tied it tight around his neck without ceremony. Caleb kissed her forehead before they left, something he hadn't done before, and she didn't flinch from it. They moved fast, staying off the main trails, navigating the underbrush with practiced steps. Ash led even with the limp. He seemed more alive out there, as if the trees recognized him and bent away to let him pass. Caleb followed, watching his friend's back, rifle ready. They saw no one that first day. Just deer prints in the soft mud, birds circling far overhead, and the occasional rustle of foxes slipping through brush. That night, they made camp beneath a rock outcropping and lit no fire. The stars were sharp above them and the cold bit deep. Caleb pulled his coat tighter and stared up at the sky, listening to the creak of branches and the faint whine of distant wolves. Ash sat cross-legged, carving again. "You never told me why you stayed out here," he said, not looking up. Caleb shifted. "The war ended. But when I came back, nothing felt real. The house was empty. My brother was gone. The land was the only thing that didn't lie to me." Ash nodded slowly. "Same. My people are scattered. What's left of my family wouldn't recognize me now. I keep moving so I don't have to wonder if they're still looking." The two men sat in silence for a while, the kind only people who've known too much loss can share. "I didn't expect her," Caleb said suddenly. "Martha. I wasn't looking for anyone." "She didn't expect you either," Ash replied. "But she's still there. That means something." They arrived at town on the 3rd day. If you could call it that, 3 buildings, 1 general store, a sheriff's post, and a saloon with a slumped roof and smoke-stained windows. Caleb had been here once before years ago. It hadn't improved. They kept their heads down. Bought supplies quickly. Powder, shot, canned beans, sugar, and a small vial of quinine. The shopkeep eyed Ash warily but took the coins without protest. As they packed the supplies into their bags behind the store, a voice called out. "Well, look who wandered back from the grave." Caleb turned slowly. A man stood in the alley, lean, dressed in gray suspenders and a bowler hat that had seen better days. He had a Colt strapped low on his thigh and a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Doyle," Ash whispered to Caleb. "He used to ride with Scar. Mean but smarter." Doyle took a step forward. "Heard about what happened out in the hollow. Heard Scar got himself buried under wet pine and regret." Caleb stayed silent. "You boys heading back up that way?" Doyle asked, voice too casual. "Don't matter," Caleb said. We're just passing through. Doyle clicked his tongue. See, I was thinking, maybe you hand over that bag and we forget this meeting happened. Ash moved subtly, shifting his weight. Caleb didn't blink. Not today. Doyle smiled wider. Didn't think so. Then he drew. Caleb fired first. The shot echoed through the alley. Doyle stumbled back, hit in the shoulder, and collapsed against the wall, cursing. Ash moved in close, kicked the pistol away, and stared him down. Tell your people what you saw, Ash said. Tell them to leave the hollow alone. Doyle gritted his teeth. You think that's how this works? No, Caleb said. But it's how it ends. They turned and walked out of town with their supplies. Behind them, Doyle slumped to the ground, pressing his hand to the bleeding wound, eyes full of something halfway between fear and hatred. That night they made camp closer to home. Neither man slept much. By morning the cabin would be just a ridge away. And they knew they'd be bringing more than just supplies with them. The ridge broke open to a wide, mist-laced view of the valley below. Pines stretched in crooked rows, damp and dark from last night's rain. The trail wound down steep and narrow, slick with loose stone, but Caleb knew they were close now. The air felt familiar, tinged with the scent of bark, creek water, and smoke that no longer meant danger, just home. Ash paused halfway down the incline, crouching low, hand brushing the dirt like he was tasting it. Caleb scanned ahead, every muscle taut. What is it? Caleb whispered. Ash didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, nostrils flaring, then pointed at a set of shallow prints in the mud. Not deer. Not boots. 2 sets, maybe 3. Fresh. No wagon, no pack animals. Riders. They came while we were gone, Ash muttered. Caleb felt the chill again, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable knowledge that something sacred had been trespassed. They dropped into silence, descending quickly but cautiously. Every creak of leather and rustle of brush felt too loud, too alive. By the time they reached the base of the ridge, the trees had thickened, narrowing their sight lines and stealing the sun. Then they heard it, low voices cracking wood, the metallic clatter of tools. Caleb gripped his rifle tighter, and Ash drifted a few paces ahead, his steps nearly silent. As they neared the clearing, they crouched beneath a dense screen of shrubs. What they saw stopped both men cold. 3 riders. Not bandits in the usual sense. These men were older, better equipped. Their horses were tied near the creek. One man, tall and balding, worked a hatchet against the cabin's porch rail, prying it loose like he had every right in the world. Another stood by the shed inspecting the animal pens. The third, dark-bearded, with an officer's bearing, stood just outside the cabin door talking to someone inside. Martha. Her silhouette moved past the window, slow and deliberate. She wasn't panicking. Not yet. But there was a gun in her hand. They ain't scars, Caleb whispered. No, Ash said. They're worse. Caleb nodded. Mercs? Possibly. Or hired thugs from town. Doyle's warning. Something inside Caleb clicked shut. His fear didn't scream, it coiled. Tight. Focused. They haven't seen us yet. We flank, he said. You take the shed. I'll draw them. Ash didn't argue. They split. Caleb moved back through the trees, looped wide, staying low. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his hands didn't shake. This wasn't the battlefield, not exactly. This was personal. And everything he loved was within shouting distance of those bastards. He found his mark, a hollow stump with clean sight to the porch. He raised his rifle. Exhaled. He fired. The bullet struck the porch, splintering wood inches from the man's shoulder. The balding one dropped his hatchet and dove behind the railing, swearing. Caleb chambered another round. Step away from the door, he shouted. That woman's under my protection. The bearded man turned calmly toward the sound. He raised one hand like a sermonizer at a pulpit. We don't want blood, he called. We were invited. You're a liar, Caleb growled. The man's smile didn't falter. Miss Martha offered us tea. The cabin door opened. Martha stepped out, slow, deliberate. Her rifle was held across her chest, not raised, not lowered. Her eyes locked on Caleb, then flicked to the man beside her. He's stalling, she said loudly. They were trying to intimidate me. I'm fine. That was all Caleb needed. He fired again. This time, the man beside the shed dropped to the dirt, screaming, shoulder wound. Ash moved like wind from the tree line, launching into the balding man before he could rise. A sickening crunch followed, bone or teeth, Caleb didn't know. The man didn't get up again. Martha used the distraction. She shoved her rifle barrel into the bearded man's gut and fired. The shot roared. He staggered back, hand clasped to his side, but didn't fall. Instead, he lashed out, backhanding her hard across the jaw. Caleb roared, broke from cover, charging the porch. The man turned to him too late. Caleb tackled him off the steps, both of them slamming into the dirt in a tangle of limbs and pain. The world shrank to elbows, fists, and fury. Caleb landed 2 good punches before the man twisted, slamming his elbow into Caleb's ribs. Caleb felt something crack but didn't stop. He drove his forehead into the man's nose, felt it give, heard the man scream. Then Ash was there, grabbing the man from behind, yanking him upright and slamming him face-first into the porch rail. Silence. Blood pooled in the snow. Caleb rolled onto his back, gasping. Martha knelt beside him seconds later, her cheek already bruising, lips split. "You're alive." "Barely," he wheezed. Ash stood over the unconscious man, eyes dark, knife still in hand. "We should finish it." But Caleb raised a hand. "No. We need to know who sent them." "What? And what they know?" Ash nodded once, reluctant but obedient. They tied the man up with leather cord, bound him to the porch post. The other 2 were dead, one by Martha's shot, the other by Ash's hands. By dusk, the cabin was whole again. The porch railing repaired. The bodies buried farther out, beneath loose stones with no markings. The captured man came to at twilight, groaning and cursing. Caleb sat across from him with a lantern between them, face expressionless. "You talk or I leave you out for the wolves." The man spat blood but said nothing. Ash stepped forward and without a word, pressed the edge of his blade to the man's cheek. "Doyle?" the man muttered. "Said to keep the place under watch. Said you'd come back through this way. He wanted to know how many of you there really were." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Gold?" the man hissed. "You think people believe you built this all up from nothing? Word is you found something out here. Doyle wants it." Caleb leaned back. "There's no gold." "There never is," the man sneered. "But that don't matter. The myth's enough. Makes men stupid." Martha, standing in the shadows, said quietly, "Then let them be stupid somewhere else." Ash looked at Caleb. "We send a message?" "Yes," Caleb said. "One they'll remember." They left the man tied to a tree at the trailhead. His boots removed. Just enough food to make it a hard journey back. Let Doyle hear the story. Let others whisper it. That night, back in the cabin, Caleb sat by the fire, silent. Martha cleaned the cut on his side, her touch gentle despite the pain. "You didn't have to come back," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, I did." Ash sat nearby, carving again, this time a small figure. A bird. Its wings half-formed. Its eyes carefully shaped. When Martha returned to the hearth, she knelt down, pressing her forehead briefly to Caleb's. "I'm tired of running," she whispered. "So stop," he said. "Stay." She did. Outside, wind whispered through the trees. The land breathed, quiet again. But not tamed. Never tamed. Caleb knew this wasn't the end. The hollow would always be a beacon, for danger, for hope, for myth. But he no longer stood alone against it. And when the next threat came, and they would face it together. Stronger, sharper, unbreakable. The days that followed were eerily calm. A stillness stretched over the hollow like a taut wire, silent but not serene. It was the kind of quiet that animals felt before a storm. Martha tended the garden and reinforced the door latches. Caleb hauled logs from the forest and sawed them down, stockpiling firewood and barricades alike. Ash spent hours ranging the perimeter, checking the ridge line for tracks, sniffing the air like the wolves he moved among. They didn't speak often, but everything between them felt sharpened, ready. No one said it aloud, but they all knew Doyle wouldn't let the insult stand. He'd want revenge. And when men like him wanted revenge, they came with fire and numbers. What they didn't expect was resistance. What they never imagined was people willing to die for something as unprofitable as peace. It was on the 6th morning that Ash returned from the western ridge with urgency in his steps. He didn't knock. Just opened the door and spoke. 4 men. Armed. Riding hard. They'll be here before dark. Caleb nodded once. Doyle? Ash shook his head. Didn't see him. But they carry his mark. Black cloth tied to the rifle stocks. That's how they signal they're not looking to talk. Martha closed the root cellar door and wiped her hands on her apron. Then we don't give them a chance. They moved quickly. This wasn't the last skirmish. This would be the war the cabin had been waiting for. The earth seemed to understand. The wind died down. The trees stiffened. Even the birds stopped singing. Caleb unrolled a canvas from under the floorboards. Inside were weapons from another life, An old 6-shot revolver, a Springfield rifle, 2 hand-forged blades. Tools of a soldier, buried and now unearthed. Ash prepped the terrain. He placed snare wires at the trail entrance, loose stones on the slope where horses might stumble. He packed gunpowder into jars and buried them under moss, leading each to a wire he could yank from the shed's shadow. Martha built a fire not for warmth but for signal. She crushed dried cedar and ash leaves into the flames to send thick white smoke into the sky. It wasn't just for warning. It was a message. By midday everything was in place. Then nothing. The stillness held like a breath. Until hoofbeats came. Slow, deliberate. Caleb knelt behind a stack of split logs, eyes on the tree line. Ash crouched beneath the shed's overhang, fingers poised on the ignition cord. Martha stayed inside, peering through a slit in the wood, her rifle barrel resting just inside the frame. The riders emerged 2 at a time, cloaked in dust, rifles slung loose, hands relaxed but alert. One was tall and skeletal, a scar cutting down the right side of his face like it had been done with glass. Another had a red bandana and fingers stained with tobacco. The third looked barely old enough to grow a beard, but his eyes were hard. The fourth, Doyle. He hadn't come armed. His hands were raised. But Caleb didn't trust the empty gesture. Not anymore. "I came to talk," Doyle called. Caleb didn't answer. Doyle walked ahead of the other 3, boots crunching in the dirt. "You think killing my boys means you won something? You built a little dream out here, that's plain. But the world doesn't let dreams live, friend. You should have sold out when you had the chance." Caleb's voice rang out from behind the logs. "This land's not for sale." Doyle laughed. "You really believe that? Even now?" Behind him, the man with the red bandana twitched. His hand drifted toward his belt. Ash moved first. With a swift yank, he pulled the ignition cord. A jar exploded beneath the trail. Dirt and flames spat upward, knocking the lead horses back and throwing the younger rider to the ground. His scream was cut short by another shot, Caleb's. The man with the red bandana raised his rifle, but Martha fired from the cabin. Her bullet caught him in the gut and he crumpled. The skeletal man dove for cover, returning fire wildly. Doyle ducked and rolled behind a fallen log. He screamed something, orders, maybe curses, but the words were swallowed by gunfire. Ash moved like a shadow across the clearing, silent and lethal. He circled behind the log, flanking Doyle. The skeletal man saw him too late. Ash lunged from the underbrush and drove his knife into the man's side. The fight was short, brutal, final. Then only Doyle remained. Pinned, alone, bleeding from a graze to the shoulder. Caleb stepped out from behind cover, revolver drawn, walking toward him slowly. "You brought this," Caleb said. "You don't get to play the victim." Doyle spat. "You think this ends with me? There's always more men. More guns. You can't hold this place forever." "Maybe not," Caleb said, raising the pistol, "but we can hold it long enough." Martha emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. Ash came to stand beside Caleb, his blade still red. Doyle looked at all 3. "Go on then. Kill me." "No," Martha said. Caleb hesitated. "You're going to walk. You're going to carry what happened here back to the others. Let them decide if they want to share your fate." Ash dropped a sack at Doyle's feet, half a canteen, stale bread, no bullets. "You make it to town," Ash said. "Maybe someone will patch you up. Maybe not." Doyle looked up, trembling with fury. "You're fools." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but we're free." They turned their backs on him. By nightfall Doyle was gone. Limping. Bloody. Defeated. The stars came out, silent sentinels above the hollow. The fire crackled low, casting orange light across the faces of the 3 who remained. Ash cleaned his blade and set it beside him. "He'll talk." "Let him," Caleb said. "Let them all talk." Martha stood beside the hearth. She'd cleaned the blood from her hands, but her eyes still burned with adrenaline. "I was afraid," she said, "when I saw them coming. Not because of what they do, but because I didn't want to lose this. Either of you." "You won't," Caleb said softly. "Not while I breathe." Ash gave a short, almost smile. "We're more than just people in a cabin now. We're something they don't understand." "What's that?" she asked. "A promise." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and fire through the open windows. In the distance, a coyote howled, not a cry of mourning but a song of survival. Caleb stepped outside and looked over the land. The scars were still there, burnt brush, broken earth, graves near the edge of the woods, but the cabin stood. The trees stood. And so did they. He didn't know how long they'd be allowed to hold this place. Maybe months. Maybe years. But what they had forged here, between strangers made kin by pain and persistence, was something eternal. As dawn broke the next day, golden light spilled across the hollow. Caleb walked the perimeter not out of fear but duty. Behind him he heard laughter, soft, real. Martha and Ash sharing coffee, arguing over the best place to plant the new corn rows. The war wasn't over. But for the first time they'd won a battle not just for survival, but for identity. And in the harsh, unyielding frontier that was everything.